After being unjustly accused, a woman prayed to God for a miracle. Minutes later, what happened brought her to tears. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the stained glass windows of First Baptist Church of Pine Grove, Texas, casting kaleidoscope patterns on Jennifer Walker's worn Bible. Her fingers traced the familiar verses as 25 eager faces watched her from the semicircle of chairs in her Sunday school classroom. At 32, Jennifer had spent the last decade teaching these classes, watching children grow from wide-eyed toddlers into thoughtful young Christians. "And what do you think Jesus meant when he said to love your neighbor as yourself?" she asked, her voice gentle but engaging. A forest of small hands shot up, and Jennifer smiled at their enthusiasm. This was where she felt most alive, sharing God's word with young minds eager to learn and understand. Little Sarah Martinez, whose father owned the local grocery store, spoke up first. "It means we should treat everyone with kindness, like how you helped my dad when our store almost closed last year." The other children nodded in agreement, and Jennifer felt a warm glow in her chest. The campaign she'd organized to save Martinez Grocery from being pushed out by a large chain store had united the community in ways she hadn't expected. But from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of Robert Thompson, the head of the church council, watching through the classroom door window. His face wore an expression she couldn't quite read, something between interest and calculation. He quickly moved on, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the modest surroundings of the small-town church. After class, Jennifer gathered her materials, carefully filing away the children's artwork depicting their interpretations of the day's lesson. The church was unusually busy for a Sunday afternoon, with various committee members hurrying through the halls, clutching papers and speaking in hushed tones. The upcoming mission project to build a medical clinic in Guatemala had energized the entire congregation. Jennifer, Linda Carter, a fellow teacher and one of her closest friends, appeared in the doorway. The finance committee's asking for the latest fundraising numbers. They seem particularly interested in the special donations account. "I'll bring everything to tomorrow's meeting," Jennifer replied, organizing the folders on her desk. As project coordinator, she had insisted on complete transparency in all financial matters. "We're ahead of schedule. The community has been incredibly generous." Linda lingered, lowering her voice. "Have you noticed anything odd about the way Robert and his group have been handling things?" Sarah mentioned that her father was pressured into making a much larger donation than he could afford. Jennifer frowned. She had heard similar whispers from other small business owners in Pine Grove, but nothing concrete enough to warrant concern. "I'll look into it," she promised. "The last thing we want is for anyone to feel coerced into giving." As she drove home that afternoon in her modest sedan, Jennifer reflected on how Pine Grove had changed over the past year. New construction projects had sprung up along Main Street, and several longtime businesses had mysteriously changed hands. The small Texas town of 15,000 souls was growing, but something about the growth felt forced, artificial. Her small craftsman house welcomed her with familiar creaks in the floorboards and the scent of the roses she'd planted in memory of her mother. Inside, photographs lined the walls, snapshots of mission trips, church events, and countless moments with her students. A particular image caught her eye: last year's Christmas pageant, where she stood surrounded by beaming children. In the background, partially obscured, Robert Thompson appeared to be in an intense discussion with Mayor Williams and several men she didn't recognize. The evening air carried the sound of cicadas as Jennifer sat on her porch, reviewing the mission project's financial reports. The numbers were impressive, over $300,000 raised in just 6 months. But something about the special donations account nagged at her. Several large contributions had been logged from companies she'd never heard of, all processed through the same bank in Houston. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Just heard Robert's group is pushing to fast-track the project. They want to break ground in Guatemala next month instead of waiting until spring. Seems rushed." Jennifer set down her phone, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. The original timeline had been carefully planned to ensure proper permits and partnerships were in place. Rushing things could lead to complications, or worse. Monday morning found her in the church office, preparing for the finance committee meeting. Mary Beth, the elderly church secretary who had served the congregation for 3 decades, stopped by her desk. "Jennifer, dear," she whispered, glancing around nervously, "I probably shouldn't say anything, but I've been noticing some strange things with the donation records, numbers that don't quite match up when I'm reconciling the books." Before Jennifer could probe further, Robert Thompson's voice boomed from the doorway. "Jennifer, Just the person I wanted to see. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. We've had some exciting developments with the mission project. Would you mind stopping by my office later? The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface of their close-knit community. At lunch, she sat with Linda in their favorite diner, picking at a grilled cheese sandwich. I did some digging, Linda said, stirring her iced tea. Those new companies that made the big donations, they all trace back to a holding corporation owned by Robert's brother-in-law. And guess who just bought 3 properties on Main Street? Jennifer pushed her plate away, her appetite gone. We need to be careful, Linda. If something's not right, we need solid evidence before we start making accusations. Robert's family has been pillars of this community for generations. That's just it, Linda replied, leaning forward. Nobody questions anything they do. Remember when the homeless shelter suddenly lost its funding last year, or how the youth center renovation project just disappeared from the church budget? The afternoon sun was setting when Jennifer finally made her way to Robert's office. Through the window, she could see him in another intense discussion with Mayor Williams and a man in an expensive suit she didn't recognize. They fell silent as she knocked on the door. "Ah, Jennifer." Robert's voice was warm, but his eyes were sharp. "We were just discussing some exciting opportunities for the mission project. Come in, come in." As she stepped into the office, Jennifer noticed a folder on Robert's desk quickly being tucked into a drawer. The mayor nodded curtly and excused himself, followed by the unknown man. The atmosphere in the room felt charged, like the air before a storm. "Jennifer, we've been so blessed by your work on this project," Robert began, settling behind his massive mahogany desk. "The Lord has truly provided, hasn't he? In fact, we've received some additional pledges that will allow us to expand the scope significantly." She listened as he outlined changes to the project, changes that seemed to shift its focus from serving the community in Guatemala to creating what sounded more like a private medical facility. Every attempt to ask about the financial details was smoothly deflected. As she left the church that evening, the Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something important, something that would have consequences she couldn't yet understand. At home, she spread out all the project documentation on her kitchen table. As she cross-referenced numbers and dates, patterns began to emerge. The special donations account seemed to be a maze of transfers and deposits that obscured their true sources, but proving anything would require access to records she didn't have. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Linda. "Be careful. Just overheard Robert talking about making some necessary changes to the project leadership. Watch your back." Jennifer sank into her favorite armchair, her mother's Bible in her lap. As she prayed for guidance, she had no way of knowing that her life was about to change dramatically. The foundation of trust and respect she had built over years of service was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall on Pine Grove. In her quiet home, Jennifer Walker continued to pray, unaware that she was about to become the center of a storm that would shake their small Texas town to its very core. The October rain hammered against the windows of Pine Grove First Baptist Church's conference room, where Robert Thompson sat at the head of a heavy oak table, surrounded by 5 other men in expensive suits. The digital clock on the wall read 9:45 p.m., long after the church's normal hours of operation. Mayor Williams nervously adjusted his tie, while James Harrison, Robert's brother-in-law and CEO of Harrison Holdings, tapped his Mont Blanc pen against a stack of financial documents. "The Walker woman is becoming a problem," Robert said, his voice cutting through the rhythmic drumming of the rain. "She's been asking questions about the special donations account. Mary Beth tells me she spent 3 hours reviewing the books yesterday." Mayor Williams cleared his throat. "Can't we just restrict her access, say it's a new church policy or something?" James Harrison shook his head, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light. "Too obvious. Besides, she's already seen enough to be dangerous. The question is, what has she figured out?" "She's smart," Robert admitted, remembering how Jennifer had organized the community to save the Martinez grocery store, a property his development company had hoped to acquire. "And she has influence. The congregation trusts her completely." The man at the far end of the table, a lawyer named Michael Chen, spread several documents across the polished surface. "Then we need to destroy that trust, and I think I've found a way." The group leaned forward as Chen outlined his plan. Through carefully manipulated bank records and falsified documents, they would create a paper trail suggesting Jennifer had been systematically skimming money from the mission project funds. The evidence would be irrefutable, the timing perfect. "But it needs to be more than just financial records," Harrison interjected. "We need witnesses, people willing to say they saw something suspicious." Robert smiled, thinking of Sarah Martinez's father, who owed his bank a significant amount of money. "Leave that to me." Amazing how cooperative people become when their livelihoods are at stake. Outside the conference room, Linda Carter stood frozen in the darkened hallway, her heart pounding. She'd returned to grade papers, not expecting anyone to be at the church this late. The men's voices carried clearly through the door left slightly ajar, and what she'd heard made her blood run cold. As she carefully backed away, her shoulder brushed against a stack of hymn books. The resulting clatter seemed deafening in the quiet church. Inside the conference room, the voices fell silent. "Check that," Robert's voice commanded. Linda turned and ran, her footsteps muffled by the aged carpet. She didn't stop until she reached her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she saw figures silhouetted in the church doorway watching. The next morning, Jennifer arrived at her classroom to find Linda waiting, her face pale. "We need to talk," Linda whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Not here. Meet me at Joe's diner during lunch. Take a different route than usual." Throughout her morning classes, Jennifer noticed subtle changes in how some people treated her. Mrs. Peterson, who had always warmly greeted her, hurried past with averted eyes. One of her students' parents abruptly withdrew their child from her Sunday school class, citing no specific reason. At precisely 12:15, Jennifer walked into Joe's diner, deliberately choosing a booth near the back. Linda arrived 5 minutes later, looking as if she hadn't slept. Before she could speak, Robert Thompson's wife, Eleanor, slid into the booth next to them. "Linda, dear," Eleanor's voice dripped with honey-coated venom, "I heard about your mother's medical bills. Such a burden for a teacher's salary. Robert mentioned the bank might be able to help refinance your house. Why don't you join us for dinner tonight to discuss it?" The color drained from Linda's face. I should get back to the church," she stammered, practically fleeing the diner. Jennifer watched her friend go, the uneasy feeling in her stomach growing stronger. Eleanor's smile remained fixed. "Jennifer, you've done such wonderful work with the mission project. It's such a shame." "What's a shame, Eleanor?" "Oh, nothing, dear. Just be careful. Sometimes people who reach too high fall the hardest." With that, she stood and left, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken threats. That evening, Jennifer received a text from Linda. "Can't talk. Sorry. Need to protect my family." Attached was a photo of what appeared to be banking records, showing suspicious transfers from the mission project account to an offshore entity. Jennifer stayed up late into the night, poring over her own copies of the project documentation. She discovered discrepancies she hadn't noticed before, subtle changes in the numbers, modifications so slight they were almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. But when added together, they painted a damning picture. The next morning, she arrived early at the church, determined to confront Robert with her findings. But as she reached for her office door, she noticed something was different. The nameplate had been removed and 2 men she didn't recognize were removing boxes from her office. "Ms. Walker," Robert's voice came from behind her. "The church council had an emergency meeting last night. Given the irregularities we've discovered, we feel it's best if you step down from your positions effective immediately." Jennifer turned to face him, acutely aware of the growing crowd of onlookers in the hallway. "What irregularities?" Robert's face showed practiced concern. "Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. We've already contacted the authorities." He held up a file. "The evidence is quite clear. Over $50,000, Jennifer, from donations meant for sick children." "That's impossible," Jennifer protested, her voice rising. "We have witnesses," Robert cut her off. "People who saw you accessing the accounts after hours, making unauthorized transfers. The bank records don't lie, Jennifer." Mary Beth appeared at the edge of the crowd, tears in her eyes. "I trusted you," the elderly secretary said. "All those times you asked to review the books alone, I thought you were just being thorough." Jennifer felt the walls closing in. Faces she had known for years now looked at her with disgust and disappointment. She saw Mr. Martinez in the crowd, holding his daughter Sarah's hand, unable to meet her eyes. "My lawyer will be contacting you," Robert continued smoothly. "The church is prepared to show mercy if you cooperate fully and repay what you've taken. Otherwise," he let the threat hang in the air. As Jennifer walked to her car, she heard the whispers following her. Parents pulled their children closer as she passed, Her phone buzzed continuously with messages from church members expressing their shock and disappointment. At home, she found an envelope taped to her door. Inside were copies of bank statements, transfer records, and witness statements, all pointing to her guilt. But something caught her eye, a tiny detail in one of the documents that didn't quite fit. Thunder rumbled overhead as Jennifer spread the papers across her kitchen table. If she could prove these documents were falsified, but how? And who would believe her now? Her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. Back off if you know what's good for you. Some stones are better left unturned. Jennifer sank into her chair, the weight of the conspiracy finally becoming clear. This wasn't just about missing money. There was something much bigger happening in Pine Grove, something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. In the growing darkness of her kitchen, Jennifer Walker realized she was now alone, facing an enemy far more dangerous than she had imagined. But as she clutched her mother's Bible, a quiet determination settled over her. They had underestimated her faith, her resilience, and most importantly, her commitment to the truth. The storm outside intensified, but Jennifer barely noticed. She began to pray, not knowing that her greatest test and her most profound miracle was yet to come. The Pine Grove Gazette's headline screamed across the front page, "Local church teacher accused of embezzling mission funds." Jennifer Walker's hands trembled as she read the article from the safety of her kitchen, the morning sun casting long shadows across the damning words. Her own photograph, taken at last year's church picnic, stared back at her, a reminder of happier times that now seemed impossibly distant. The article was brutal in its accusations, quoting anonymous sources close to the investigation who detailed her supposed betrayal of the community's trust. The reporter hadn't even attempted to contact her for comment. At the bottom of the article was a statement from Robert Thompson, expressing his deep personal disappointment and urging anyone with additional information to come forward. A knock at her door made her jump. Through the window, she saw two men in dark suits standing on her porch, their badges glinting in the morning light. "Ms. Walker? I'm Detective James Morrison, and this is Detective Santos. We're with the Pine Grove Police Department. We need to ask you some questions about the First Baptist Church Mission Project." Jennifer's heart raced as she let them in, grateful she had called her lawyer the night before. The detectives settled onto her couch, their expressions professionally neutral as they opened their notebooks. "Ms. Walker, we have records showing 23 separate unauthorized transfers from the project's account to various offshore entities," Detective Morrison began. "Can you explain why your digital signature appears on all of these transactions?" "That's impossible," Jennifer replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "I only had authorization to review the accounts, not to make transfers, and I've never accessed any offshore accounts." Detective Santos pulled out a stack of papers. "We have sworn statements from 3 witnesses who saw you accessing the church computer system after hours. According to Church Secretary Mary Beth Collins, you specifically requested private access to the financial records on multiple occasions." "Yes, to review them for the project reports," Jennifer explained. "Everything I did was transparent and documented." "Then you won't mind explaining these?" Morrison slid several photographs across her coffee table. They showed her entering the church late at night on various dates, photographs she knew had to be doctored because she had never been there at those times. "Those are fake," she stated firmly. "I can prove where I was on those nights." "Like the night of October 15th, Santos asked, "when you were supposedly having dinner with Linda Carter." Jennifer's blood ran cold. Linda had been her alibi for several evenings when the supposed transfers took place. "Yes, exactly. Ms. Carter has already provided a statement indicating that no such dinner took place," Morrison said, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "In fact, she's given us quite detailed information about your unusual behavior over the past few months." The betrayal hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Linda had been her closest friend, her confidant. The pressure they must have put on her to turn. "I want my lawyer present for any further questions," Jennifer said, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. The detectives exchanged looks. "Of course," Morrison replied, standing. "But we'll need you to come down to the station this afternoon. And Ms. Walker, don't leave town." After they left, Jennifer sank to her kitchen floor, her body shaking with silent sobs. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from church members, former friends, and local reporters. Each notification felt like another nail in the coffin of her former life. She forced herself to check the messages, needing to understand the full scope of what she was facing. Some were brutal in their condemnation, others expressed sad disappointment, but one made her pause. An anonymous text read, "Check the metadata on the transfer documents. Not all copies are created equal." Jennifer's hands steadied as she pulled out the documents she'd been given. There was something there, a thread she could pull. But before she could examine them more closely, another knock came at her door. This time it was Sarah Martinez, her young Sunday school student, tears streaming down her face. "Miss Jennifer, Daddy says I can't come to your class anymore. He says you're a bad person now, but I don't believe it." Jennifer's heart broke as she knelt to the child's level. "Sarah, honey, Sarah Martinez!" A sharp voice cut through the air. Rebecca Martinez hurried up the walk, grabbing her daughter's arm. "What did I tell you about coming here? This woman is a criminal." "Mrs. Martinez, please," Jennifer started, but the woman cut her off. "Stay away from my daughter," Rebecca hissed, her voice low and frightened. "Haven't you caused enough trouble? Do you know what they'll do to us if—" She stopped abruptly, her face paling as she realized what she'd almost revealed. As they hurried away, Jennifer noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked across the street, its engine running. The same vehicle had been outside her house earlier that morning. Her lawyer called shortly after. "Jennifer, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. They're building a strong case, too strong. These documents, the witness statements, the photographs. This isn't amateur hour, someone's put a lot of resources into this." "It's all fabricated," Jennifer insisted. "If I can just prove—" "Jennifer, listen to me," her lawyer interrupted. "This goes beyond simple embezzlement. I've been getting calls, subtle suggestions that I should withdraw from your case. Someone powerful wants you to take the fall for this." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just about missing money anymore. She was being framed to cover up something much bigger. That afternoon, Jennifer walked into the Pine Grove police station, head held high despite the whispers and stares that followed her. News traveled fast in a small town, and her face had been splashed across every local news outlet. The interrogation room was cold and sterile. For 3 hours, she maintained her innocence as the detectives presented piece after piece of manufactured evidence. They had an answer for every alibi, a counter for every explanation. "Just confess, Ms. Walker," Detective Morrison said, his patience wearing thin. "Make it easier on yourself. With cooperation, you might avoid jail time." "I want to speak to my lawyer," Jennifer repeated for what felt like the 100th time. As she left the station, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of blood red. Church members who once greeted her with warm hugs now crossed the street to avoid her. Outside the grocery store, she overheard 2 elderly women discussing her case. "Always the quiet ones," one said, shaking her head. "To think we trusted her with our children." Back home, Jennifer found her front door had been vandalized, the word "thief" spray-painted in angry red letters. As she cleaned it off, Mrs. Peterson, her elderly neighbor of 8 years, watched from her porch, disappointment etched on her face. That night, unable to sleep, Jennifer reviewed the evidence again. The anonymous texter had been right. There were inconsistencies in the metadata of the documents, small discrepancies that might prove they were forgeries. But as she dug deeper, her computer suddenly froze, then crashed. When it rebooted, all her files were gone. Her phone buzzed with another anonymous message. "Final warning. Some questions don't need answers." Jennifer sat in her darkened living room, the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on her. They had taken everything, her reputation, her career, her friends, and now they were trying to take her freedom. But they had underestimated one thing, her faith. Clutching her mother's Bible, Jennifer began to pray. She didn't ask for the accusations to go away or for her life to return to normal. Instead, she prayed for the strength to face whatever came next, and for the wisdom to expose the truth, no matter the cost. Outside, the black SUV remained parked, its occupants watching, waiting. Inside her home, Jennifer Walker prepared herself for the battle ahead, unaware that her greatest test and her most powerful testimony was still to come. The Pine Grove Community Bank stood as an imposing brick edifice in the heart of downtown, its shadow falling across Jennifer Walker's modest sedan as she attempted to access her accounts. The young teller's eyes widened with recognition before quickly looking away, her fingers nervously tapping at her keyboard. "I'm sorry, Ms. Walker, but your accounts have been frozen pending investigation." The teller's voice quivered. "You'll need to speak with bank management." "All of my accounts?" Jennifer's voice cracked. Her entire life savings, her mortgage payments, everything, gone with a few keystrokes. "Bank policy regarding criminal investigations," a smooth voice interjected. James Harrison appeared beside her, his expensive suit and confident smile a stark contrast to Jennifer's increasingly desperate situation. We take allegations of financial misconduct very seriously. Jennifer noticed the slight emphasis he placed on allegations, the subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He was enjoying this. "You can't do this," she protested. "I haven't even been charged with anything." "On the contrary, Ms. Walker," Harrison replied, loud enough for the growing audience of bank customers to hear. "We can, and we must. Perhaps you should have considered the consequences before abusing the trust of our community." As Jennifer walked out of the bank, her cheeks burning with humiliation, her phone buzzed with an email from her lawyer. The mortgage company was initiating foreclosure proceedings due to criminal involvement. They had only given her 15 days to vacate her home. The destruction of her life continued with ruthless efficiency. At the grocery store, her credit cards were declined. The local diner where she'd eaten breakfast every Sunday for 7 years suddenly couldn't find her regular table. Her health insurance was mysteriously cancelled. Even her cell phone carrier dropped her service, citing breach of contract. Walking down Main Street became an exercise in enduring whispered conversations that stopped abruptly as she passed. Mothers pulled their children closer. Shopkeepers suddenly found urgent business in back rooms, and former friends became intensely interested in their phones. One afternoon, Jennifer found herself face to face with Linda in the post office. Her former friend's face was drawn and pale, dark circles under her eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "Linda, please," Jennifer whispered. "You know me. You know I didn't do this." Linda glanced nervously at the security cameras before responding, her voice barely audible. "My mother's cancer treatment, they threatened to cancel her insurance. I have to think about my family." She hurried away, leaving Jennifer standing alone among the curious stares of other customers. That evening, Jennifer returned home to find her power shut off. When she called the utility company, they claimed her payment had been returned for insufficient funds, despite her having set up automatic payments years ago. As she sat in her darkening house, using her laptop's dwindling battery power, Jennifer discovered that her professional teaching credentials had been suspended pending investigation. Her entire career, built over more than a decade of dedicated service, had been effectively ended with a single administrative decision. A knock at her door revealed Sarah Martinez, clutching a flashlight and a small paper bag. "I saw your lights were out," the child said quickly, glancing over her shoulder. "I brought you some candles and cookies. Daddy doesn't know I'm here." Jennifer's heart swelled with emotion at the simple act of kindness. "Sarah, you shouldn't—" "They're wrong about you," Sarah interrupted, her young face fierce with conviction. "I heard Daddy crying last night, telling Mommy he was sorry. He said he had no choice." Before Jennifer could respond, a car's headlights swept across the front of the house. Sarah's eyes widened in fear, and she ran, disappearing into the darkness just as the black SUV that had been following Jennifer cruised past her house. The next morning brought more devastation. The local news ran a special investigation piece, complete with grainy security footage, allegedly showing Jennifer accessing church computers late at night. The footage was clearly doctored. She had proof she'd been elsewhere on those dates, but who would believe her now? The reporter, Amy Chen, someone Jennifer had once considered a friend, painted a damning picture. Sources close to the investigation suggest the embezzlement may have been going on for years, Amy reported, standing in front of the church. Questions are now being raised about previous charity projects Ms. Walker was involved with. The story sparked a fresh wave of harassment. Her car was vandalized, windows shattered, and thief scratched into the paint. Anonymous death threats began appearing in her mailbox. Someone threw a brick through her living room window with a note attached, "Leave town or else." When Jennifer reported the vandalism to the police, Detective Morrison merely shrugged. "Maybe you should consider moving somewhere else," he suggested, not even bothering to take notes. "Small towns have long memories." Her lawyer called with more bad news. "They're building a complex financial fraud case," he explained. "The prosecutor is talking about 25 years in prison. Jennifer, they're offering a plea deal. 5 years if you confess and return the money." "Money I never took," Jennifer replied firmly. "This is all fabricated, and you know it." "Of course I know it," he sighed. "But proving it, they've thought of everything. Bank records, witness statements, computer logs, it's all too perfect. And now I'm hearing rumors they might add charges of conspiracy and tax evasion." Later that day, Jennifer sat in her car outside the church, watching as Robert Thompson and Mayor Williams emerged from a lengthy meeting. They were joined by James Harrison and several men in expensive suits, the same group that seemed to be behind every major development project in Pine Grove lately. Using her phone's camera, She zoomed in on their conversation. Though she couldn't hear what they were saying, their body language suggested an argument. Robert jabbed his finger angrily at one of the men, who responded with a dismissive wave before they all climbed into their respective vehicles. As Jennifer started her car to leave, she noticed Mary Beth hurrying out of the church, clutching what appeared to be files to her chest. The elderly secretary looked around furtively before rushing to her old station wagon. Their eyes met briefly, and Jennifer saw something there: fear, guilt, and perhaps a hint of determination. That night, as Jennifer sat among the boxes she'd begun packing, facing the reality that she might soon be homeless, her doorbell rang. On her porch was a plain manila envelope. Inside, she found copies of church financial records, different from the ones that had been used to accuse her. A post-it note in Mary Beth's distinctive handwriting read, "God forgive me for my silence." Backdoor computer access logs, check the IP addresses. Hope flared in Jennifer's chest for the first time in weeks, but as she began to examine the documents, her computer screen suddenly went black. When it rebooted, a message appeared. "Last chance to walk away. Next time it won't be just your computer." Looking out her window, Jennifer saw the now familiar black SUV parked across the street. They were watching, always watching. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she had something concrete. Proof that might expose the truth. She carefully hid Mary Beth's documents in her mother's old Bible, the one place she knew they wouldn't think to look. Then she knelt beside her bed, just as she had done every night since she was a child, and prayed, not for deliverance from her troubles, but for the strength to endure what was to come. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "guide me toward your truth, no matter the cost." Outside, thunder rumbled across the Texas sky, and Jennifer Walker prepared herself for the storm that was about to break over Pine Grove, a storm that would either destroy her completely or reveal a truth more shocking than anyone could imagine. The basement of Pine Grove Public Library smelled of old books and dust, providing Jennifer Walker with a temporary sanctuary from the watchful eyes that seemed to follow her everywhere else. She had chosen this spot carefully. It was one of the few places in town without security cameras, and the ancient computer terminals were unlikely to be monitored by whoever was orchestrating her destruction. Mary Beth's documents lay spread before her, illuminated by the flickering fluorescent lights. The IP addresses in the computer logs revealed a pattern. Someone had been accessing the church's financial systems from multiple locations simultaneously. More importantly, several of these locations were impossible, showing logins from Houston at the exact same time as ones from the church office. "Looking for something specific?" Jennifer startled at the voice, quickly gathering the papers. But it was only Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly librarian, who had known Jennifer since she was a child. The old woman glanced at the documents, then at the black SUV visible through the basement window. "They've been parked out there for 2 hours," Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly, adjusting her glasses. "Funny how they show up everywhere you do these days." "Mrs. Rodriguez, save it, dear." The librarian's voice was kind but firm. "My Eduardo worked in cybersecurity before he passed. Those look like server logs to me. Back door there, see?" She pointed to a series of numbers on one of the pages. "Classic signs of remote access tunneling." Jennifer stared at her in surprise. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled sadly. "Not everyone in this town is fooled by their lies, Jennifer. Some of us remember what Pine Grove was like before the Thompsons and their friends started developing everything." That evening, working from Mrs. Rodriguez's personal laptop in a back room of the library, Jennifer began to unravel the complex web of digital manipulation. The falsified bank records had been created using timestamps that didn't align with the server logs. It was a small discrepancy, but it proved the documentation had been fabricated. Her phone buzzed, another threatening text from an unknown number. "The library closes in 15 minutes. Smart people go home when they're told." Jennifer's hands trembled as she quickly photographed the evidence. As she left through the back door, she heard cars starting up in the parking lot. The black SUV's headlights flashed to life, but another car, an old pickup truck, pulled up beside her. "Get in," said a gruff voice. It was Mr. Martinez, Sarah's father, looking straight ahead as if afraid to meet her eyes. "My daughter says I owe you this much." As they drove through the darkening streets of Pine Grove, Mr. Martinez spoke rapidly. "They own my mortgage, my business loans, everything. Said they'd take it all if I didn't sign those statements against you. But Sarah, she keeps asking how I can teach her about honesty while living a lie." He pulled up 2 blocks from her house. "I can't help you openly, but there are others, people who've seen what's really happening to our town. Watch for the blue porch lights. Jennifer walked the remaining blocks home, her mind racing. As if by divine providence, she began noticing them. Houses with blue porch lights scattered throughout the neighborhoods, silent signals of resistance in the growing darkness. The next morning, she found a note tucked into her mailbox, written in Linda's familiar handwriting. Check the permit records for the Guatemala Clinic project. Something's not right. At the county courthouse, Jennifer requested the international building permits filed for the mission project. The clerk, a young woman she didn't recognize, returned with a puzzled expression. That's strange. Those files were just transferred to the restricted access section this morning, orders from the mayor's office. But as Jennifer turned to leave, the clerk slipped her a crumpled post-it note. Back entrance, 5 o'clock. When Jennifer arrived at the specified time, she found the clerk waiting with a USB drive. I made copies before they moved the files, the young woman whispered. My brother lost his business to these people last year. What they're planning in Guatemala, it's not a medical clinic. The drive contained architectural plans that bore little resemblance to the modest clinic they had been raising funds for. Instead, the drawing showed what appeared to be a private compound, complete with security features and restricted access areas. Jennifer's investigation was interrupted by a call from her lawyer. They're moving up the timeline, he warned. The prosecutor wants to bring charges next week. Jennifer, these people, they're not just trying to silence you anymore. They want to make an example of you. That night, unable to sleep, Jennifer knelt beside her bed in prayer. The evidence was mounting, but she still didn't have the full picture. What was Robert Thompson really planning? Why go to such lengths to destroy her? A soft tapping at her window made her jump. It was Sarah Martinez, her face barely visible in the darkness. Miss Jennifer, Daddy said to tell you they're having a special meeting at the church tonight. Something about changing the mission project plans. Jennifer hugged the brave little girl. Sarah, you shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Jesus wasn't safe either, Sarah replied with the simple wisdom of a child, but he still did what was right. After ensuring Sarah got home safely, Jennifer drove to the church, parking a block away. Through the windows of the conference room, she could see Robert Thompson and his associates in another late-night meeting. This time, she was close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. The Walker situation is contained, Robert was saying. Once the charges are filed, no one will believe anything she says about the project. They better not, one of the men responded. We've invested too much to let some Sunday school teacher ruin everything. The facility has to be ready by spring. Our clients are not patient people. Jennifer's heart raced as she recorded the conversation on her phone. But just then, a branch cracked behind her. She spun to find Detective Morrison standing there, his face grim in the shadows. You're trespassing, Ms. Walker, he said quietly, and interfering with an ongoing investigation. But instead of arresting her, he glanced at the window, then back at her. My brother was chief of police here for 20 years. Last year, they forced him into early retirement when he started asking questions about certain development projects. Strange things happen in Pine Grove these days. He handed her a business card. There's a federal agent who might be interested in what's really going on here. But be careful who you trust. These people, they have eyes everywhere. As Jennifer drove home, she noticed more blue porch lights had appeared throughout the neighborhood. Small acts of defiance, pinpoints of hope in the darkness. She wasn't alone anymore. There were others who saw the truth, who were willing to risk everything to expose it. In her kitchen, she carefully organized all the evidence she had gathered, Mary Beth's documents, the server logs, the architectural plans, and her recording from the church. The truth was there, hidden in the details, waiting to be revealed. But as she reached for her phone to contact the federal agent, the screen lit up with a final warning. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Pine Grove First National Bank. Come alone or the Martinez family loses everything. Time to end this game. Jennifer clutched her mother's Bible, drawing strength from its worn pages. They thought they had her cornered, but they didn't understand the power of unwavering faith. Tomorrow would bring either her vindication or her downfall, but either way she would face it with the truth as her shield. Outside, the Texas night was alive with cicada song, nature's chorus accompanying her prayers. In homes throughout Pine Grove, blue lights shone in windows like stars, reminding Jennifer that even in the darkest times, God's light could not be extinguished. The Pine Grove County Courthouse stood sentinel in the morning light, its limestone facade weathered by time and Texas storms. Jennifer Walker climbed the worn steps, each footfall echoing with the weight of prayers and preparation. Her simple navy blue dress and pearl necklace, her mother's, were armor against the scrutiny she knew awaited inside. The gallery was packed. News of the trial had spread beyond Pine Grove, attracting reporters from Dallas and Houston. Jennifer could feel their cameras tracking her every move as she made her way to the defense table. Her lawyer, Michael Ramirez, squeezed her arm reassuringly as she sat down. "Remember," he whispered, "they're expecting you to break. Don't give them that satisfaction." District Attorney William Preston rose from the prosecution table, his expensive suit and carefully styled hair presenting the image of righteous authority. "Your Honor, the state intends to prove that Jennifer Walker, trusted teacher and church leader, systematically embezzled over $300,000 from charitable donations meant for a medical mission in Guatemala." The evidence began to unfold like a carefully choreographed dance. Bank statements, witness testimonies, computer records, each piece presented with precision, building a wall of seemingly irrefutable proof around Jennifer. Mary Beth Collins was the first witness, her hands trembling as she clutched her Bible. "I trusted her," the elderly secretary testified, her voice breaking. "She would often stay late, saying she needed to review the accounts. I never thought—" Jennifer watched as her friend avoided her gaze, noting the slight tremor in Mary Beth's left hand, her tell when she was hiding something. The documents Mary Beth had secretly provided were burning a hole in Jennifer's bag, but they couldn't be presented yet. The timing had to be perfect. Robert Thompson took the stand next, every inch the concerned church leader. "It pains me deeply to be here today," he began, his voice heavy with practiced sorrow. "Jennifer was more than just a teacher. She was family. Her betrayal has shaken our entire congregation." As Robert testified about discovering the financial discrepancies, Jennifer noticed something odd. Mayor Williams, sitting in the front row, was fidgeting with his tie, his face showing concern rather than triumph. When Robert mentioned specific dates of transfers, the mayor's discomfort became more pronounced. During the lunch recess, Jennifer overheard a whispered conversation in the courthouse bathroom. "The numbers don't match what we discussed," a woman was saying. "If someone looks too closely at the Guatemala permits—" The voices stopped abruptly when they realized they weren't alone. The afternoon brought Linda Carter to the stand. Her friend's face was ashen as she recounted the suspicious behavior she had allegedly witnessed. But as Linda testified about specific dates, she kept touching her cross necklace, something Jennifer knew she only did when struggling with a lie. "Miss Carter," Michael Ramirez began his cross-examination, "you previously provided a written statement about having dinner with the defendant on October 15th. Today you've testified that no such dinner took place. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Linda's eyes darted to where Robert Thompson sat. I may have been confused about the dates." "Or perhaps," Michael pressed, "you were pressured to change your testimony. Perhaps someone reminded you about your mother's medical bills?" "Objection," Preston shot to his feet. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained," Judge Anderson ruled. But Jennifer had seen the flash of fear cross Robert's face. The prosecution's financial expert testified next, presenting complex charts showing the flow of money from church accounts to offshore entities. But Jennifer noticed something in his presentation, a pattern in the transaction dates that matched the information in Mary Beth's documents. As the day drew to a close, Jennifer's phone buzzed silently. An unknown number had sent a photo, Sarah Martinez crying while men in suits talked to her father outside his store. The message read, "Remember what's at stake, take the deal." That evening, in her lawyer's office, Jennifer spread out Mary Beth's documents alongside the prosecution's evidence. "Look at these timestamps," she pointed out. "They prove the transfers were made when I couldn't possibly have been at the church." "They'll claim the records are fabricated," Michael warned. "We need more." "Then maybe it's time to talk to the FBI," Jennifer said, pulling out Detective Morrison's card. Michael's face grew serious. "Jennifer, once we do that, there's no going back. These people, they're not just trying to protect money. This is about power." A knock at the office door made them both jump. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, the librarian, clutching a thick manila envelope. "I've been doing some research," she said, her eyes bright behind her glasses. "Every major development project in Pine Grove for the past 5 years has gone through the same shell companies. And guess where else those companies are building? Guatemala." The pieces were starting to fit together, but Jennifer knew they still didn't have enough. The evidence was circumstantial, the connections too complex for a simple trial about missing money. Back home, Jennifer found another envelope taped to her door. Inside was a single photograph showing Robert Thompson shaking hands with a man whose face had been in the news recently, a businessman accused of running illegal operations across Central America. Her phone buzzed again. Last chance. Take the deal tomorrow or the Martinez family won't be the only ones to suffer. Jennifer spent the night in prayer, the weight of her decision heavy on her heart. She knew that fighting back meant putting others at risk. The Martinez family, Linda's mother, all the people in Pine Grove who had been quietly showing their support with blue porch lights. But as she read her mother's Bible, a verse stood out. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. The next morning, Jennifer walked back into the courthouse, her head held high. She had made her decision. As she passed the rows of spectators, she noticed something remarkable. Small blue ribbons pinned to lapels and dresses, silent symbols of support from people who knew the truth but were afraid to speak it. Robert Thompson was back on the stand, now testifying about the Guatemala project. But his usual smooth confidence seemed shaken. Every time he mentioned the medical clinic, Mayor Williams shifted uncomfortably in his seat. During cross-examination, Michael Ramirez approached with a new set of documents. Mr. Thompson, are you familiar with these building permits? Before Robert could answer, the courthouse doors burst open. A man in a dark suit strode in, flanked by several others. Your Honor, he announced, holding up a badge. I'm Special Agent David Chen, FBI. We need to temporarily suspend these proceedings. The gallery erupted in whispers as Agent Chen approached the bench. Jennifer watched as Robert Thompson's face drained of color, and James Harrison quickly slipped out of the courtroom. The truth was finally coming to light. But Jennifer knew the real battle was just beginning. As she caught Sarah Martinez's eye in the gallery, she silently prayed for strength. The path ahead would require more than just evidence. It would take a miracle to expose the full scope of what was happening in Pine Grove. But for the first time since this ordeal began, Jennifer felt the presence of something greater than fear. God's timing was perfect, and though the storm wasn't over, she could see his light breaking through the clouds. The small chapel in the Pine Grove County Courthouse sat silent and still, its stained glass windows casting colored shadows across Jennifer Walker's clasped hands. She had sought refuge here during the court's lunch recess, needing a moment alone with God before facing what was to come. The morning's dramatic interruption by the FBI had thrown the proceedings into chaos, but she knew the real battle still lay ahead. Lord, she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the sacred quiet, I've tried to be strong to fight this battle with truth and dignity, but I'm afraid, not for myself anymore, but for all those who've risked everything to help me. Please, show me the way. The chapel's old wooden pews creaked as she shifted, remembering Sarah Martinez's brave face in the courtroom, the blue ribbons worn by silent supporters, Mary Beth's trembling hands as she testified. So many people caught in the web of corruption that had ensnared Pine Grove. A shaft of sunlight suddenly broke through the clouds outside, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the chapel walls. Jennifer felt a profound sense of peace wash over her, a certainty that transcended her fears. As she rose to return to the courtroom, she didn't notice the small security camera in the corner, flickering with an unexpected surge of power. The afternoon session began with tension thick in the air. FBI agents lined the walls of the courtroom, their presence adding gravity to the proceedings. Robert Thompson sat at the prosecution table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by barely concealed anxiety. Behind him, Mayor Williams kept checking his phone, his face growing increasingly pale. Judge Anderson cleared his throat. Given this morning's interruption, does the prosecution wish to proceed? District Attorney Preston stood, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, the state maintains its position. Regardless of any concurrent federal investigation, the evidence against Ms. Walker is clear and compelling. Then let's continue, the judge ruled. Mr. Thompson, you're still under oath. As Robert Thompson retook the stand, Jennifer's lawyer, Michael Ramirez, approached with quiet confidence. Mr. Thompson, let's discuss the real purpose of the Guatemala project. Objection! Preston shot to his feet. The purpose of the project is not relevant to the charges of embezzlement. Your Honor, Michael countered, the defense contends that the entire basis of these charges is fabricated to cover up the true nature of the project. We have evidence. Before he could finish, Robert Thompson suddenly gripped the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. The courtroom lights flickered, and a strange sensation filled the air like the moment before a lightning strike. I can't, Thompson whispered, then louder, I can't do this anymore. The gallery erupted in whispers as Thompson began to shake, his face contorting with internal struggle. God forgive me, he gasped. I have to tell the truth. At that precise moment, Every light in the courtroom went dark except for a single beam that seemed to shine directly on Jennifer. The phenomenon was so unexpected, so inexplicable, that the entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. "The charges against Jennifer Walker are false," Thompson's voice rang out in the semi-darkness. "We fabricated everything, the bank records, the witness statements, all of it. The Guatemala project, it was never meant to be a medical clinic. The emergency lights sputtered to life, but the mysterious beam remained, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere." FBI agents moved closer, as Thompson, seeming almost compelled by a force greater than himself, continued his confession. "The project was a front," he revealed, words tumbling out as if he couldn't stop them. "We've been using charitable organizations to launder money, to build private facilities for trafficking operations across Central America. When Jennifer started asking questions about the accounts, we had to discredit her. But the truth has been eating at my soul." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Mayor Williams attempted to flee but was blocked by FBI agents. In the gallery, people were standing, pointing at the inexplicable light that still illuminated Jennifer. Security cameras captured everything, their footage later showing no technical explanation for the focused beam. "Order!" Judge Anderson's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. Preston, given these developments—" "Your Honor," the district attorney interrupted, his face ashen, "the state moves to dismiss all charges against Jennifer Walker." Jennifer sat motionless, tears streaming down her face as Thompson continued to confess, revealing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Pine Grove's leadership. The mysterious light remained, a tangible reminder of divine intervention that even the most skeptical observers couldn't explain. Linda Carter rushed forward from the gallery. "It's all true," she cried out. "They threatened our families, our livelihoods, but we can't be silent anymore." Others began standing, adding their voices to the confession, years of forced complicity finally breaking free. Sarah Martinez broke away from her father's grasp, running to Jennifer and throwing her arms around her. "I knew God would help you," she exclaimed, just like Daniel in the lion's den. The FBI agents were now moving quickly, securing documents and detaining key figures. Special Agent Chen approached Jennifer, shaking his head in amazement. "We've been investigating this network for months, but we never expected this." He gestured at the light that still shone on her, defying all logical explanation. As the courtroom slowly emptied, filled now with FBI agents gathering evidence and shell-shocked spectators trying to process what they'd witnessed, Jennifer remained in her seat. The mysterious light finally faded, but its impact had been indelibly burned into the memories of everyone present. Mary Beth approached her, tears in her eyes. "Jennifer, can you ever forgive me? I was so afraid, but when I saw that light, I knew God hadn't abandoned us." Outside the courthouse, news cameras captured the aftermath as Robert Thompson and several other community leaders were led away in handcuffs. But they also captured something else: hundreds of Pine Grove residents arriving, many wearing blue ribbons, gathering to show their support for the truth that had finally been revealed. Mr. Martinez pushed through the crowd to reach Jennifer. "My family owes you an apology," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your faith, it showed us what real courage looks like." The sun was setting over Pine Grove as Jennifer finally left the courthouse, its last rays catching the stained glass of the chapel where she had prayed. The security footage from that small chapel would later show something remarkable. At the exact moment of her prayer, a surge of light had filled the room, beginning the chain of inexplicable events that had exposed the truth. That evening, as news helicopters circled overhead and federal agents continued their investigation, Jennifer returned to her classroom at First Baptist Church. The room was exactly as she had left it weeks ago, children's artwork still decorating the walls, but nothing would ever be the same again. She opened her mother's Bible, finding the verse that had sustained her, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The miracle in the courthouse had done more than clear her name. It had broken the chains of corruption that had bound Pine Grove, proving that even in the darkest times, God's light could not be hidden. The story of the mysterious light and Thompson's divine compelled confession would be debated for years to come, with some claiming technical malfunctions and others insisting on divine intervention. But for Jennifer Walker and the people of Pine Grove, the truth was clear. They had witnessed a modern-day miracle, a testament to the power of unwavering faith in the face of overwhelming odds. The morning after the miraculous events in the courthouse, Pine Grove awakened to a town transformed. FBI vehicles lined the streets, their presence a stark reminder that yesterday's divine intervention had set in motion an avalanche of revelations. Jennifer Walker sat in her kitchen, watching the sunrise while CNN broadcasted aerial footage of federal agents raiding homes and offices across town. In a stunning development, the news anchor reported, what began as a local embezzlement case has exposed what authorities are calling one of the largest charity fraud and money laundering operations in Texas history. Sources say the conspiracy reaches far beyond Pine Grove. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Reporters wanted interviews, federal agents needed statements, and supporters sent messages of encouragement. But one text caught her attention, from Special Agent Chen. Evidence room, police station, 9 a.m. There's more you need to see. At the station, Chen led Jennifer into a room filled with documents, computers, and evidence boxes. What you stumbled upon, he explained, spreading files across a table, was just the tip of the iceberg. The Guatemala project was one of dozens. The evidence was staggering. Maps showed a network of similar operations across Central America, all disguised as charitable ventures. Bank statements revealed millions of dollars flowing through Pine Grove's supposedly modest community organizations, but most disturbing were the photographs, images of fortified compounds built under the guise of medical clinics and schools. They were creating infrastructure for criminal enterprises, Chen explained, his voice grim. Drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, all hidden behind a facade of Christian charity. Robert Thompson was their public face, but the real power players were much higher up. Just then, Linda Carter burst into the room, clutching a laptop. Jennifer, you need to see this. I've been going through the church's backup servers. They didn't know I had access to the old system archives. The laptop screen showed years of correspondence between Robert Thompson and various shell companies. But more significantly, it revealed connections to prominent state politicians, international business figures, and even federal officials. This is why they came after you so hard, Chen mused, examining the emails. You weren't just threatening their local operation, you could have exposed their entire network. Throughout the day, new revelations emerged hourly. Mayor Williams, facing multiple federal charges, agreed to cooperate with investigators. His testimony implicated dozens of prominent figures in Pine Grove and beyond. Jennifer watched from her living room as one news break followed another. James Harrison, Robert's brother-in-law, was arrested trying to flee to Mexico. The president of Pine Grove First National Bank was taken into custody. Even some federal regulators were being investigated for their role in overlooking suspicious transactions. By afternoon, national news vans had descended on Pine Grove. Outside the church, reporters gathered as FBI agents carried out box after box of documents. Sarah Martinez and her father stood among the onlookers, holding hands and watching their town's transformation. "Miss Jennifer," Sarah called out, running to hug her former teacher. "Daddy's helping the FBI now. He's telling them everything about how they forced him to lie." Mr. Martinez nodded solemnly. "They threatened to destroy us if we didn't comply. But after what happened in that courtroom, well, God's light has a way of exposing darkness." The mysterious light that had accompanied Thompson's confession became a symbol of divine intervention in Pine Grove. Security camera footage, aired repeatedly on national news, showed no technical explanation for the phenomenon. Engineers and experts were baffled by how a single beam could illuminate Jennifer while the rest of the courtroom remained dark. Late that afternoon, Jennifer received another urgent message from Agent Chen. At the federal building, he showed her a series of photographs recovered from Robert Thompson's private safe. They showed elaborate ceremonies in various locations where powerful figures inducted new members into their criminal enterprise. "It was like a secret society," Chen explained. "They called themselves the Shepherds of Progress. They targeted small religious communities, using their faith as cover for their operations. Pine Grove wasn't their first conquest, but thanks to you, it will be their last." As evening approached, Jennifer was called to an emergency meeting of the church council. What remained of it? In the same room where Thompson had once plotted against her, shell-shocked church members now gathered to begin the process of healing. Mary Beth, still shaken but resolute, presented a comprehensive audit of the church's finances. "We've identified all the tainted accounts," she reported, "but more importantly, we found records of other communities they were targeting. We need to warn them." The council voted unanimously to cooperate fully with federal investigators and to establish a committee for rebuilding trust within the community. They asked Jennifer to lead it, acknowledging that her unwavering faith had helped expose the truth. Outside the church, Pine Grove was coming to terms with its new reality. Blue ribbons appeared on more doors and windows, no longer signals of secret resistance, but symbols of support for truth and transparency. The local newspaper, under new management after its editor's arrest, began publishing detailed exposés of the corruption that had gripped their town. Linda Carter, finally free from the threats that had silenced her, organized a community meeting at the high school gymnasium. Hundreds attended, many sharing stories of how Thompson's organization had coerced and manipulated them over the years. "We were all victims," Linda declared, her voice strong, "but we're also all responsible for letting fear silence us." Jennifer showed us that one person's faith can break the chains of corruption. As the meeting concluded, Agent Chen pulled Jennifer aside. "Thompson's talking," he revealed. "Says he couldn't stop himself in that courtroom. Claims it was like some force compelled him to tell the truth. Our psychologists are calling it a stress-induced breakdown, but..." Jennifer smiled, remembering the peace she'd felt in the courthouse chapel. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "God's justice works in mysterious ways." That night, as federal agents continued their work and news helicopters circled overhead, Jennifer sat on her porch, watching her neighbors emerge from their homes to talk openly for the first time in years. The fear that had gripped Pine Grove was lifting, replaced by a sense of cautious hope. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Martinez. "Daddy says our town is healing because you believed in the truth. He says sometimes God sends angels disguised as Sunday school teachers." Jennifer looked up at the stars, grateful for the divine intervention that had transformed her darkest hour into a moment of miraculous liberation. Pine Grove would never be the same, but perhaps that was God's plan all along. Sometimes it takes breaking something completely to rebuild it stronger than before. As she closed her eyes in prayer, Jennifer knew that while the exposure of corruption had shaken their community to its core, it had also created an opportunity for genuine renewal. The light that had shone in that courtroom hadn't just revealed the truth, it had illuminated a path forward for all of Pine Grove. 2 weeks after the miraculous courtroom revelation, Jennifer Walker stood at the lectern of First Baptist Church, facing a congregation that filled every pew. The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, creating patterns that reminded her of the inexplicable light that had illuminated her darkest hour. "Forgiveness," she began, her voice steady and clear, "is not just about absolving others of their sins. It's about freeing ourselves from the chains of bitterness." The congregation sat in rapt attention, many wearing the blue ribbons that had become a symbol of Pine Grove's renewal. In the front row, Linda Carter wiped tears from her eyes. Behind her sat the Martinez family, Sarah beaming with pride at her Sunday school teacher. Even some of those who had turned against Jennifer most viciously were present, their heads bowed in reflection. "Our community was trapped in darkness," Jennifer continued, "not just by those who sought to corrupt it, but by our own fear and silence. God's light exposed the truth, but now we must choose how to move forward." After the service, the church hall buzzed with activity as people gathered for what had become a weekly community healing meeting. FBI agents still maintained a presence in Pine Grove, but their focus had shifted from investigation to recovery, helping the town untangle itself from years of systematic corruption. Special Agent Chen, who had become a regular presence in these meetings, stood to address the crowd. "We've identified over 200 charitable organizations that were compromised by Thompson's network," he reported. "Thanks to the evidence found here in Pine Grove, we're now able to help communities across 5 states." Mary Beth, who had been instrumental in organizing the church's recovery efforts, presented their progress in restoring legitimate charitable works. "The Real Guatemala Medical Clinic project will break ground next month," she announced, this time with full transparency and federal oversight. The transformation of Pine Grove had become a national story of redemption. News crews regularly visited to document the town's recovery, fascinated by both the miraculous courtroom event and the community's response to it. The mysterious light that had accompanied Thompson's confession remained unexplained, with even skeptical investigators admitting they could find no logical explanation. As Jennifer walked through town later that afternoon, she noticed how much had changed. The oppressive atmosphere of fear had lifted. People greeted each other openly on the streets. Small businesses that had been pressured into silence were thriving again. Blue ribbons and porch lights, once signals of secret resistance, now symbolized the town's commitment to transparency and truth. Outside Martinez Grocery, a new sign proudly displayed, "Community owned and operated." Mr. Martinez had used his testimony against Thompson's organization to help other business owners, who had been similarly coerced. Together, they had formed a cooperative to ensure no single group could ever again gain such financial control over their community. Linda caught up with Jennifer as she entered the store. "The faith-based counseling center opens next week," she reported excitedly. "We've already had calls from 3 other towns asking for help setting up similar programs. People need a safe place to heal." Inside, Sarah Martinez was helping customers while her father managed the register. The store had become a hub for community organizing, its bulletin board covered with notices for recovery meetings and support groups. "Miss Jennifer," Sarah called out, running to hug her teacher. "Did you see what we did with the Sunday school money?" The children's collection, once used as part of Thompson's money laundering scheme, had been rededicated to helping families affected by the conspiracy. Sarah proudly showed Jennifer photos of their first project, renovating houses for elderly residents who had lost savings in the fraud. That evening, Jennifer attended a special meeting at the courthouse. Judge Anderson had convened a community reconciliation panel, bringing together victims and those who had been coerced into supporting Thompson's schemes. "The road to healing is not easy," the judge acknowledged, "but Pine Grove has an opportunity to become a model for other communities facing similar challenges." One by one, people stood to share their stories. A bank teller admitted to looking the other way when processing suspicious transactions. A church deacon confessed to signing false documents under threat. Each testimony was met with understanding and offers of support rather than condemnation. Mary Beth's voice shook as she addressed the group. "I watched them manipulate and threaten people for years," she admitted. "My silence made me complicit, but when I saw that light shine on Jennifer in the courtroom, I knew God was giving us all a second chance." As the meeting concluded, Agent Chen pulled Jennifer aside. "Thompson's sentencing is next week," he informed her. "He's still claiming some divine force compelled him to confess. The prosecutors are calling it a psychological break, but..." Jennifer smiled, remembering the profound peace she had felt in the courthouse chapel. "Sometimes," she replied, "the truth has a power all its own." Later that night, Jennifer sat on her porch, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Her phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Just found more evidence of Thompson's network in church records. But this time we're not afraid to expose it." The night air was filled with the sound of cicadas and distant laughter. Simple, ordinary sounds that had been missing during Pine Grove's darkest days. Across the street, a young couple was installing a blue porch light, continuing the tradition that had come to represent their town's transformation. Sarah Martinez appeared at the end of her driveway, clutching a handmade card. "We made these in Sunday school," she explained, handing it to Jennifer. "It's to thank you for showing us what real faith looks like." The card was covered in children's drawings of light beams and Bible verses about truth and courage. Inside, each child had written a message about what they had learned from Pine Grove's redemption story. As Jennifer read their innocent yet profound observations, she realized that the miracle in the courtroom had done more than expose corruption. It had taught an entire generation about the power of standing firm in faith and truth. The next morning's sunrise painted Pine Grove in hues of promise. Jennifer walked to the church early, preparing for another day of healing and reconstruction. The building that had once housed secrets and lies was being transformed into a beacon of hope, its doors open to all who sought healing and redemption. In her Sunday school classroom, she found her students had decorated the walls with artwork, depicting their town's story. Darkness yielding to light, fear transformed into courage, isolation becoming community. Their simple drawings captured the essence of Pine Grove's redemption in a way that all the news reports and federal investigations could not. As she prepared for her lesson, Jennifer offered a quiet prayer of gratitude. The path of redemption was not easy, but with each passing day, Pine Grove moved further into the light, its story becoming a testament to the power of faith, truth, and divine intervention in the face of seemingly insurmountable darkness. 1 year after the miraculous events in the Pine Grove courthouse, Jennifer Walker stood before a crowd gathered on the newly renovated town square. The autumn breeze carried the scent of hope and renewal as she prepared to cut the ribbon for the opening of the Pine Grove Center for Justice and Healing. "What began in darkness," she addressed the assembled crowd, "has bloomed into light." The modern 3-story building behind her stood as a testament to the town's transformation. Its glass walls were designed to symbolize transparency, and the blue lights that had once served as secret signals of resistance now illuminated its facade as a reminder of their journey. Sarah Martinez, now one of the center's youngest volunteers, stood proudly beside her father, As Jennifer continued, this center represents more than just legal aid or counseling services. It stands as a beacon for other communities facing similar struggles, a reminder that truth and faith can overcome even the most entrenched corruption. The center had already begun making waves across the state. In its first month of soft opening, they had assisted 3 other towns in exposing similar charitable fraud schemes. The model they developed, combining legal support, spiritual counseling, and community rebuilding, was being studied by organizations nationwide. Special Agent Chen, who had become a frequent visitor to Pine Grove, spoke next. "What happened here wasn't just about exposing criminal activity," he remarked. "It was about showing how one person's unwavering faith could spark a movement for change." He glanced at the courthouse across the square, where security footage of the mysterious light still drew curious visitors and skeptical investigators. Inside the center, different floors served different purposes. The ground level housed legal aid offices, where volunteer lawyers helped victims of fraud and corruption. The second floor contained counseling rooms and support group spaces, while the top floor featured a research center dedicated to studying and preventing institutional corruption. Linda Carter, now the center's executive director, led tours through the facility. "Every aspect was designed with healing in mind," she explained to visitors. "From the meditation garden to the children's play area, we wanted to create a space where people could feel safe sharing their stories." Mary Beth, who had become the center's archivist, had created a powerful exhibition documenting Pine Grove's journey. Photographs, documents, and testimonies lined the walls, including the security camera footage from that fateful day in court. "We must remember," she often told visitors, "so we can help others recognize the signs before corruption takes root." The Martinez family had transformed their grocery store into a community hub, hosting weekly meetings for small business owners learning to protect themselves from exploitation. Mr. Martinez, once forced into silence by threats, now traveled to other towns sharing his experience and helping establish similar support networks. "The miracle wasn't just the light in the courthouse," he would say. "It was how that moment of divine intervention gave us all the courage to reclaim our community." As the afternoon's opening ceremonies continued, Jennifer noticed familiar faces from across the state, representatives from other towns seeking guidance, federal agents who had helped expose the broader conspiracy, and journalists who continued to document Pine Grove's transformation. Sarah tugged at Jennifer's sleeve, pointing to a group touring the facility. "Look, those are the people from that town in Oklahoma you helped last month. They said their community is healing too." Indeed, Pine Grove's influence had spread far beyond Texas. The center had established connections with similar organizations across the country, creating a network of support for communities fighting corruption. They called it the Blue Light Network, a nod to the simple act of resistance that had helped sustain hope during their darkest days. Later that evening, as the crowds thinned and the sun began to set, Jennifer walked through the center's quiet halls. Each room held its own story of healing: the support group space where former antagonists had learned to forgive each other, the children's area where Sarah and her friends created artwork about truth and courage, the memorial wall honoring those who had stood firm in faith despite persecution. Linda joined her, carrying fresh coffee. "Did you see today's numbers? We've already had 300 requests for assistance from other communities. The FBI says our model is helping them identify similar operations across the country." Jennifer nodded, remembering the long journey that had brought them here. "It's amazing how God can use our darkest moments to create something beautiful." They made their way to the rooftop garden, a peaceful space designed for reflection and prayer. The view overlooked Pine Grove, now transformed from a town trapped in fear to a symbol of redemption and renewal. Blue lights twinkled across the cityscape, no longer signals of secret resistance, but proud symbols of transparency and truth. A group of visitors from another state was being led through the garden. Jennifer overheard their guide explaining the significance of the blue lights. "It started as a way for people to show support without speaking out," the guide explained. "Now it's become a national symbol for communities standing against corruption." The Pine Grove model had indeed created ripples far beyond their small Texas town. The center's research division had developed protocols for identifying signs of institutional corruption, particularly in religious and charitable organizations. Their findings were being implemented by law enforcement agencies and community groups across the country. Special Agent Chen, who had stopped by for the opening, shared some remarkable statistics. Since Pine Grove's story became public, We've seen a 20% increase in reports of charitable fraud nationwide. People are no longer afraid to speak up. They're calling it the Jennifer Walker effect at the Bureau. As night fell, Jennifer gathered with the center's staff for a closing prayer. The group included former adversaries now united in purpose, their past conflicts transformed into wisdom they could share with others. Even some of Thompson's former associates, who had chosen to cooperate with authorities, now contributed to the center's work, their experiences providing valuable insights into how corruption spreads through communities. Sarah Martinez, who had stayed late to help with cleanup, shared some exciting news. "My school is doing a project about Pine Grove's story. They're calling it When Light Breaks Through. We're learning about how to stand up for truth just like you did, Miss Jennifer." The legacy of Pine Grove's transformation continued to grow. The center's training programs were being incorporated into law enforcement academies and seminary curricula. Communities across the country were installing their own versions of the Blue Light Network, creating visible symbols of their commitment to transparency and truth. As Jennifer prepared to leave for the night, she paused in the center's lobby, looking at the wall of photographs documenting their journey. The security camera, still showing the inexplicable light from the courthouse, held a prominent place, reminding visitors that sometimes divine intervention arrives in unexpected ways. A quote beneath the photos, taken from her courtroom testimony, read, "Truth is not just about exposing darkness, it's about creating space for light to enter." These words had become the center's motto, encapsulating their mission to help other communities find their way from darkness to light. Outside, the blue lights of Pine Grove twinkled against the Texas night sky, each one representing a commitment to truth and transparency. The town that had once been a cautionary tale of corruption had become a blueprint for redemption, its story inspiring others to stand firm in faith and courage. As Jennifer walked home, she passed the courthouse where it had all begun. The chapel where she had prayed in her darkest hour was now open 24 hours a day, offering a sacred space for others facing similar battles. A small plaque near the door read simply, "Light Breaks Through," in memory of the miracle that changed Pine Grove. The legacy of their journey had become something far greater than Jennifer could have imagined during those dark days of accusation and isolation. What had started as one woman's stand for truth had blossomed into a movement, touching lives far beyond their small town's borders. Pine Grove's story had become a testament to the power of unwavering faith, the importance of community courage, and the reality that even in the darkest times, divine light finds a way to break through. Have you just witnessed the extraordinary journey of Jennifer Walker and the transformation of Pine Grove? The moment when divine light broke through the darkness in that courtroom touched many hearts. What resonated most with you in this story of faith, courage, and redemption? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Was it the mysterious light, the power of community coming together, or perhaps Sarah Martinez's unwavering belief in her teacher? Your perspective could inspire others who are facing their own battles for truth.